Welcome everybody, my name is Caleb and this is your new and improved C++ series on this channel. We did a series before, but it's been a few years and I think it's an appropriate time to go through some more C++ material. So we'll try to cover some new things, also a new approach and new perspective. Overall, I think either series will do, but going forward, I'm going to recommend this content for beginners getting started, or if you have some experience but you want to learn C++ for the first time, this series is for you. Now, I want to give some theory of C++ before we just jump in and start typing stuff. I want you guys to understand why you might want to learn C++ and how C++ is different than some of the other programming languages out there. Because C++ is often considered a lower level language. And when people say lower level versus higher level, this is referring typically to how close you are to the computer hardware. So for example, if you build a website with HTML, JavaScript, this is very high level. You build that website and anybody can access that, and there's multiple layers away from the computer system it's running on. So you can imagine you have a literal computer, like let's say a laptop or a phone, and then on that you have an operating system which manages that hardware and memory access and all those low-level things. Then on top of that you have applications such as Google Chrome, and then inside of Google Chrome you have that JavaScript code executing. There's multiple layers away from that computer hardware, and therefore that's considered a high-level language. C++, on the other hand, is considered lower level because this is actually going to be compiled and executed directly on that computer. Compiling is a process of taking the C++ code and turning it into something machine code that the computer can run and understand. Because of this lower levelness of C++, it's often used for very intense applications. So if you can think of any category of software, there are typical examples of software that need a lot of performance, and these are most likely going to be written in C++. So for example, video editing, Adobe, it's written in C++. Databases, the type of tools that power many of the websites and applications out there, typically written in C++, such as MySQL. Blockchains, these, such as Bitcoin, are typically written in C++. Video games, very popular for C++ developers. Games such as, say, Call of Duty are written with C++. So by learning this language, you can create a lot of very intense applications. So you and me, we see this as a lower level language. It's used for these intense type of applications, but at some point in history, this was actually seen as a higher level language. Because we started off with assembly. This was how people could start programming computers to do whatever they wanted. The challenge with this, though, is that if you wrote an application to run on one type of processor, say an ARM-based processor, you would have to basically do that again for a different type of processor, such as x86. Now for this series, you don't have to understand the difference between those anymore anyways, because C came along and basically added a new layer of abstraction to where you can now write software and you don't have to worry about the different system architectures. C is cross-platform, can run on multiple different operating systems and architecture types. Fabulous. This was basically one of the major improvements when it came to higher level languages. Now you just have to learn a single language, C. Then C++ came around and made it even easier. So now we can introduce object-oriented programming as well as various other things inside of C++. This was a higher level language that made coding a lot easier compared to C. So at this point in time in history, C++ was a higher level language. But as we continued to build more layers and introduce new languages like JavaScript and Python, C++ is fairly low level. So it's not really the recommended programming language of choice if you're just looking to, say, build a cute little website or just a little script that you need to execute every so often. It's really ideal to learn if you, say, need an application to do some lower level stuff, interact with the system that you're on. So that's why you might want to learn C++ at a practical level. We talked about some popular use cases and how C++ stands when it comes to low level versus high level. But what about when it just comes to language theory and would you want to invest the time learning another language, specifically C++? My opinion is that if you want to have that solid foundation of computer science skills and software development, C++ is a great language to learn. It's very difficult, and you'll find that learning material for C++ is like this, where this is the C++ primer. It's like a quick start guide that's like over 1,000 pages. So it's not an easy task to pick up and get started with C++, but it's going to introduce so many things that you might not get or experience in the same way with a higher level language. So I feel like I have a deeper understanding of how things are working behind the scenes because I've learned C++. So we'll start off with just the basics. How do we get an application running? A hello world essentially, and you can go from there to build graphical user interfaces and even mobile applications if you're using the right tools. So you could do something like that with tools like C++ Builder, which is the sponsor of this series. This is an editor that allows you to create applications that are cross-platform, but even if you just want to learn the foundation of this language, you can use this tool to easily work with C++ code. So that's the easiest way to get started. This is the C++ Builder Community Edition. You can download that, install it, and then just start writing C++ code and run it, and you're good to go. I'll drop a link down in the description if you want to get started with C++ Builder, which is the editor I'm going to be using for this series. But the thing I wanted to emphasize is that it's not the editor that really matters. It's this right here. This is C++ code, and this is going to be the same regardless of what operating system and what editor you are using. So this is a Windows application, so if you're on Mac, you can find something else, or I just use Parallels, which is a really easy way to get started where you can have multiple operating systems within your Mac operating system. So from Parallels, you can just launch a new virtual machine, hit continue, and then just choose Windows 11. Then you'll have a completely functional operating system inside of your operating system. So once you have your operating system installed, go download C++ Builder Community Edition, which is forever free. And then you can say File, New, and Console Application. That will bring you to this here where you can write your CPP or C++ file. Then you just run it hitting this play button, and it'll bring up a terminal with whatever you told it to output. So let's talk a little bit about this code and what is going on. And trust me, if you're new, as you keep going, this is going to end up becoming a second language. You're just going to be able to look at this and understand what's going on. So don't be intimidated if you're new and there's a bunch of syntax and characters and stuff. The main thing to know is that this gets a lot easier as you go. The main thing is this main function. A function just executes some code, and this is the syntax. You'll say int, and then main, parentheses left and right, and then inside of that you're going to have a curly brace at the start and then a closing curly brace at the end. This is everything you want to execute when you hit this play button. The things that we want to do is see out or output some text, hello world, and then we want a new line, so that way it goes down to the next line, and then this next line here, this will just keep that terminal open, so when we hit play it stays open. When we remove this line and run it, it'll compile and it will just close out of the screen. So that's why we have that line in there to say, hey, we don't want to close out of this until we are sure we're done. Then this return 0 just means, hey, everything went as we expected. So that is your first C++ program. You might be confused also about this line here, which will basically just allow us to do input and output, or I/O. And that's what makes this cout here work. Cout, you can think of it as console out. So that's how you write to the console. So we're going to go through writing all of this code in the next videos. Don't feel like you have to be able to write that on your own or understand every piece of it. I just wanted to show you a basic application and show executing that so that we can see we told it what to do